I never thought I'd find myself staring down a complete stranger claiming I owed hundreds of dollars for violations I never knew existed. But that's exactly what happened on that warm April morning when my quiet suburban life took an unexpected turn. It was 7:30 a.m. when the aggressive knocking started. I was in the middle of my morning coffee, scrolling through emails before heading to work. My dog, Rex, a German shepherd who normally didn't bark at anything, was going ballistic near the front door. That should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. "Coming," I called out, setting my mug down and walking toward the door. Rex was still barking, hackles raised. When I opened it, I found a woman in her late 40s wearing what looked like a security guard uniform. She had a laminated badge hanging around her neck that read, "Sunset Valley HOA Enforcement," with a logo I didn't recognize. Her hair was cut in that stereotypical "can I speak to the manager" style, dyed an unnatural shade of blonde with dark roots showing. She was holding a clipboard and wore an expression of smug satisfaction that immediately set me on edge. "Isaiah Vincent?" she asked, peering at me over reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. "Yes, that's me," I replied cautiously. "I'm Karen Melton from the Sunset Valley Homeowners Association Compliance Division. I'm here to issue citations for multiple violations on your property." Her tone was clipped, almost gleeful. I blinked in confusion. "Violations? What violations? And since when does Sunset Valley have an enforcement division that makes house calls?" She scoffed and began flipping through papers on her clipboard. "Since the board voted on it last month. Didn't you read the newsletter? We've documented multiple infractions: improper garbage can placement, unauthorized garden ornaments, non-compliant mailbox, and—" She paused dramatically, "a basketball hoop installed without prior approval." I felt my blood pressure rising. I'd lived in Sunset Valley for 3 years and had always been careful to follow the HOA guidelines, annoying as they were. The basketball hoop had been approved by email months ago. "May I see these violations?" I asked, trying to remain calm. She handed me a paper with official-looking letterhead listing 4 violations with corresponding fines totaling $850. The document included grainy photos of my property and cited specific bylaw numbers I'd never heard of. "Payment is due within 7 days, Karen continued, pulling out a small handheld card reader. "We accept credit cards for your convenience. There's a 3% processing fee." That's when I noticed something odd. The HOA's logo looked slightly different from the one I was familiar with, and the phone number listed didn't match the one I had saved in my contacts. "This doesn't seem right," I said, stepping back. "I need to confirm this with the HOA board before making any payment." Karen's face hardened. "Pay now and avoid the late fee. It jumps to $1,000 after 7 days. "No, I don't think I will," I replied firmly. "I'll contact the HOA president directly." "I am the HOA president," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is official business." That was a red flag. Our HOA president was Richard Townsend, a retired accountant who'd been running things for years. I'd just spoken with him at a neighborhood barbecue last weekend. "Madam, I think you should leave," I said, starting to close the door. She stuck her foot in the doorway. "You will pay these fines, Mr. Vincent. We have the legal authority to place liens on your property." Now I was certain something was very wrong. I reached for my phone. "I'm calling the actual HOA board right now, and if you don't remove your foot from my door, I'm calling the police next." Her face flushed red. "Fine, but expect further action." She yanked her foot back, allowing me to close the door. Through the window, I watched her storm down my driveway to a white sedan with magnetic door signs that read Sunset Valley HOA Patrol. I immediately called Richard Townsend. It took him a few rings to answer. "Isaiah, everything okay? It's awfully early," he said, sounding like he was still waking up. "Richard, did the HOA recently hire an enforcement officer named Karen Melton?" I asked, watching through the blinds as the woman sat in her car, apparently writing something. "Karen who?" "No, we don't have anyone by that name, and we certainly don't have enforcement officers. What's going on?" I quickly explained the situation, describing the woman and her demands for payment. Richard's voice turned serious. "Isaiah, this sounds like a scam. We've heard reports of this happening in neighboring communities. Whatever you do, don't give her any money." "I'm calling the police right now, and I suggest you do the same. Try to get her license plate if you can." I thanked him and hung up, immediately dialing 911. While explaining the situation to the dispatcher, I noticed Karen was still sitting in her car outside my house. The dispatcher advised me to stay inside and confirmed officers were on their way. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled onto my street, lights flashing but sirens off. I watched as Karen's head snapped up. She quickly started her car and began to pull away, but one of the police cruisers blocked her exit. I grabbed my phone and went outside as the officers approached her vehicle. "Sir, please stay back," one of the officers called to me as I stepped onto my front lawn. I nodded and remained by my door, watching the scene unfold. The officers spoke with Karen for several minutes. I could see her gesturing animatedly, then pointing toward my house. Eventually, they asked her to step out of the vehicle. When she did, one officer spoke into his radio while the other continued questioning her. After what seemed like an eternity, they placed her in handcuffs and put her in the back of one of the cruisers. An officer approached me, notepad in hand. "Mr. Vincent, I'm Deputy Morris with the County Sheriff's Department. Mind if I ask you a few questions about what happened this morning?" "Not at all," I replied, inviting him inside. Over the next 30 minutes, I explained everything to Deputy Morris: Karen's unexpected visit, the fake violations, the demand for immediate payment, and the threatening behavior when I refused. I showed him the citation she'd given me, which he photographed as evidence. "You did exactly the right thing by calling us," Deputy Morris said. "We've been tracking a group running this scam across 3 counties. They target newer homeowners in HOA communities, hoping people won't know all the rules or board members yet." "So she's not alone in this?" I asked. "No, sir. Based on what we found in her vehicle, she's part of a well-organized operation. They've been hitting communities like yours for months, collecting thousands in fake fines." I shook my head in disbelief. "I almost paid her." "Many people do," Morris replied grimly. "They create urgency, use official-looking documents, and prey on people's fear of HOA penalties. We'll need you to come down to the station later today to provide a formal statement." After Deputy Morris left, I called my boss to explain I'd be late, then made some coffee to calm my nerves. Richard arrived 20 minutes later looking concerned. "Are you okay?" he asked as I let him in. "I can't believe this happened in our neighborhood." "I'm fine, just a bit shaken," I admitted. "Have other neighbors been targeted?" Richard nodded grimly. "After I spoke with you, I started making calls. The Johnsons over on Maple paid $600 last week to someone matching the same description. The Patels on Oakwood Drive were approached yesterday but were suspicious and didn't pay." "This is insane," I muttered. "How are they getting away with it?" "People are intimidated by HOAs," Richard said with a sigh. "They know many homeowners don't read the bylaws carefully and fear the consequences of non-compliance. It's the perfect scam." Richard stayed for another cup of coffee, and we discussed organizing an emergency neighborhood meeting to warn everyone. By the time he left, I was running seriously late for work, but my boss was understanding given the circumstances. That evening, I drove to the sheriff's department as requested. The station was busier than I expected, with deputies moving quickly between desks and the occasional handcuffed individual being escorted through. I approached the front desk and explained why I was there. "Mr. Vincent, yes, we've been expecting you," said the officer at the desk. "Detective Ramirez will be with you shortly." I took a seat in the waiting area, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. About 15 minutes later, a tall woman with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun approached me. "Isaiah Vincent, I'm Detective Sofia Jimenez. Thank you for coming in." She extended her hand, which I shook. "Let's talk in one of the interview rooms where it's quieter." I followed her down a hallway into a small room with a table and 4 chairs. Unlike the interrogation rooms you see on TV, this one was well lit and reasonably comfortable. "Can I get you some water?" she offered. "I'm fine, thanks," I replied, taking a seat across from her. Detective Jimenez opened a folder containing photos of Karen and what appeared to be several other individuals. "Mr. Vincent, I want to start by thanking you for your quick thinking this morning. Your call helped us apprehend a suspect we've been tracking for some time." "Happy to help," I said. "I just wish I'd recognized the scam sooner." "Don't be too hard on yourself. These individuals are professionals," she said, turning the folder so I could see its contents. "Do you recognize anyone else in these photos?" I looked carefully at the 6 photographs in front of me. "No, just the woman who came to my house, Karen Melton," she called herself. "Her real name is Brenda Lawrence," Detective Jimenez corrected. "She has prior convictions for fraud in Nevada and Arizona. The group she's working with has been operating throughout the Southwest for at least 18 months. "How extensive is this operation?" I asked, surprised by the scope. "Based on the evidence we've gathered and statements from other victims, we believe they've collected over $200,000 in fraudulent HOA fines across multiple states. They're very organized with fake credentials, professional-looking documents, and a sophisticated system for identifying potential targets." I whistled softly. "That's a lot of money." "It adds up quickly when they're charging hundreds per household," she nodded. "Now, I'd like to go through the details of your encounter step by step, if you don't mind. Every bit of information helps build our case." For the next hour, I recounted everything I could remember about the morning's events. Detective Jimenez was particularly interested in the specific threats Karen, or rather, Brenda, had made about liens and legal action. "Those threats elevate the charges from simple fraud to extortion," she explained. "And the fact that she prevented you from closing your door could constitute attempted breaking and entering." After finishing my statement and signing the necessary paperwork, Detective Jimenez walked me back to the lobby. "We may need to contact you again as the case progresses," she said. "In the meantime, be vigilant. These groups sometimes work in teams, and while we have Miss Lawrence in custody, her accomplices are still out there." "I'll keep an eye out," I promised. "Will you let me know if you catch the others?" "I can't share all the details of an ongoing investigation, but I'll make sure you're kept in the loop on major developments," she replied. "And Mr. Vincent, consider installing a doorbell camera if you don't already have one. It's an excellent deterrent and provides valuable evidence if something like this happens again." I thanked her and headed home, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. The scam was far more extensive than I'd imagined, and the idea that there might be others targeting my neighborhood was unsettling. The following day, Richard called an emergency meeting of the Sunset Valley HOA at the community center. Nearly every household was represented, packing the room to capacity. People were visibly concerned, some angry, others fearful that they might have been victimized without realizing it. Richard stood at the front of the room, gavel in hand, trying to maintain order as voices overlapped with questions and concerns. "Everyone, please," he called, rapping the gavel on the podium. "I understand you're all worried, but talking over each other won't help. Let's proceed in an organized fashion." The room gradually quieted down, and Richard nodded toward me in the front row. "I've asked Isaiah Vincent to share his experience from yesterday, which alerted us to this scam. Isaiah." I stood and faced the crowd, suddenly nervous about speaking to so many people. Taking a deep breath, I recounted my encounter with the fake HOA enforcer, the red flags that made me suspicious, and what I'd learned from the police about the broader operation. "The most important thing to remember," I concluded, "is that our HOA does not employ enforcement officers who make house calls. All official communications come through mail or email from the board, and the contact information is always the same. If someone shows up at your door demanding payment, it's almost certainly a scam." Hands shot up around the room as I finished. Richard pointed to Elena Garcia, a retired teacher who lived on the corner of my street. "What if we've already paid one of these people?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Last month, a woman came by saying our hedges were too high and we owed a $300 fine. My husband paid her because we'd just gotten a warning letter about the hedges the week before." My heart sank. The scammers were clearly doing their homework, timing their visits to coincide with legitimate HOA communications. Richard looked pained. "Elena, I'm so sorry that happened. That warning letter was real, I sent it myself, but the fine was not. Our process is always to give homeowners 30 days to address issues before any penalties are assessed." Another neighbor, Mike Donovan, stood up without being called on. "I paid $450 2 weeks ago for supposedly having the wrong color paint on my shed. The woman had photos and everything." More voices joined in, each sharing similar stories. By the time everyone had spoken, we discovered that at least 12 households in our community had fallen victim to the scam, with payments totaling over $5,000. Richard called for order again. "I've spoken with Detective Jimenez, who's handling this case. She'll be sending officers to take statements from anyone who believes they were victims. In the meantime, we're implementing several new security measures." He outlined a plan that included verification codes for all legitimate HOA communications, a community alert system for suspicious activities, and a temporary halt on all fine collections until the situation was resolved. "Additionally," he continued, "we're organizing a neighborhood watch program specifically focused on spotting these scammers. Isaiah has volunteered to coordinate this effort." I hadn't actually volunteered yet, but I nodded in agreement anyway. Given what had happened, it seemed like the least I could do. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to share their experiences and ask questions about the warning signs I'd noticed. One of them was Sandra Matthews, a new resident who'd moved in just 2 months ago. "I had someone come by last week," she said, looking embarrassed. "A man claiming to be from the Architectural Review Committee. He said our new fence wasn't approved and we needed to pay a $750 fine or take it down immediately." "Did you pay?" I asked gently. She nodded, eyes downcast. "We just installed that fence. It cost us thousands. I didn't want to risk having to remove it." "You should contact Detective Jimenez," I said, giving her the detective's card. "The more victims who come forward, the stronger the case they can build." As I was speaking with Sandra, my phone rang. It was Detective Jimenez. "Mr. Vincent, we've had a development I thought you should know about. Miss Lawrence has agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for consideration during sentencing." "That's good news, right?" I asked. "Very good news." She's provided information about the entire operation, including names and locations of her accomplices. "We're coordinating with departments in neighboring counties to make arrests." "Has she mentioned how they're selecting their targets?" I asked, thinking of Sandra and the others who'd been scammed. "Yes, and it's concerning. They've been accessing public HOA records, monitoring community Facebook groups, and even attending open houses in target neighborhoods to gather intelligence. They know who's new, who's recently made property improvements, and who's received legitimate warnings from the HOA." I glanced at Sandra, who was listening intently. "That explains a lot. We just had a community meeting, and it looks like they've hit at least 12 houses in our neighborhood alone." "That matches what Miss Lawrence told us," Detective Jimenez confirmed. "Sunset Valley was one of their primary targets because of your active HOA and the relatively high home values. They typically avoided communities with extensive security camera coverage." After finishing my call with the detective, I shared the information with Richard and the other neighbors who had lingered after the meeting. The revelation about how the scammers had been gathering intelligence sent a chill through the group. Our community's openness, the very thing many of us valued about living here, had made us vulnerable. In the days that followed, I worked with Richard to establish the Neighborhood Watch program. We created a phone tree, distributed information about identifying legitimate HOA communications, and encouraged everyone to install security cameras. The sheriff's department increased patrols in our area, and Detective Jimenez sent officers to take statements from all the victims we'd identified. A week after my encounter with Brenda Lawrence, I was leaving for work when I noticed an unfamiliar car moving slowly down our street. It was a dark blue sedan with two men inside, and they appeared to be photographing houses. I remembered Detective Jimenez's warning about accomplices still being at large and decided to follow at a distance in my own car. I called Richard as I pulled out of my driveway. "Richard, there's a suspicious vehicle on Sycamore right now. Two men taking pictures of houses. Can you alert the watch group while I follow them? Don't engage them, Isaiah," Richard warned. "Just get a license plate if you can, and I'll call the sheriff." I kept a safe distance as the blue sedan wound through our neighborhood, occasionally stopping while the passenger took photos of specific houses. When they turned onto Maple Street, I saw them pull up in front of the Johnsons' house, one of the families who had paid a fake fine the previous week. One of the men got out and approached the front door, carrying what looked like a clipboard. I parked down the street and called 911, describing the situation and providing the license plate number I'd managed to see. "Units are already en route to your neighborhood, sir," the dispatcher informed me. "Please stay in your vehicle and do not approach the suspects." Within minutes, I heard sirens in the distance. The man at the Johnsons' door must have heard them too, because he suddenly turned, jogged back to the car, and they sped away right past me. I got a clear look at both men as they drove by, one with a shaved head and goatee, the other wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. Two sheriff's cruisers appeared moments later, and I flagged them down, explaining what I'd seen and the direction the sedan had gone. They immediately continued the pursuit, sirens blaring. I walked over to check on the Johnsons. Barbara Johnson, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, was standing on her porch looking confused. "Isaiah, what's happening? There was a man here saying something about a tree violation, but he ran off when the siren started." I quickly explained the situation, and Barbara's expression changed from confusion to anger. "Those crooks. They already got $600 from us last week for a supposed drainage issue. Frank will be furious when he hears they tried again. I stayed with Barbara until her husband returned from his golf game, then headed to work, calling Richard on the way to update him. By the time I returned home that evening, news had spread throughout the neighborhood. The sheriff's department had apprehended both men after a short pursuit. They were identified as known associates of Brenda Lawrence, part of the same fraud ring. The next day, Detective Jimenez called to thank me for my help. "Your quick thinking led directly to these arrests," she said. "With Miss Lawrence's cooperation and the evidence we found in their possession, we have a solid case against the entire group." "What kind of evidence?" I asked. "Lists of target homes, fake HOA documents for communities across 3 states, card readers for collecting payments, and over $20,000 in cash." They were keeping meticulous records, which is going to make it easier to identify and contact victims. "How many communities were they targeting?" "At least 15 that we've confirmed so far." "Your neighborhood wasn't the only one hit hard, but you were the first to organize an effective response. The sheriff wants to use Sunset Valley as a model for how other communities can protect themselves." I felt a surge of pride at that. What had started as a frightening encounter had led to something positive for not just my neighborhood, but potentially many others. Over the next few weeks, our community came together in ways I hadn't seen before. The Neighborhood Watch program expanded, with volunteers taking shifts to monitor suspicious activity. Richard implemented all the security measures he'd promised, including a secure verification system for official HOA communications. Most importantly, neighbors were talking to each other more, checking in on the elderly and newly moved-in families who might be vulnerable to scams. A month after the initial incident, the county prosecutor's office contacted me about testifying in the upcoming trial. Brenda Lawrence and her 5 accomplices were facing multiple felony charges, including fraud, extortion, identity theft, and criminal impersonation. According to the prosecutor, they had targeted over 200 households across the Southwest, collecting an estimated $250,000 in fraudulent HOA fines. The preliminary hearing was set for late June, and I was nervous about testifying. I'd never been in a courtroom before, except for jury duty once years ago. Detective Jimenez assured me that my part would be straightforward, just telling the truth about what had happened that morning in April. When the day arrived, I took the morning off work and dressed in my best suit. The courthouse was an imposing stone building downtown, with security checkpoints and busy hallways filled with lawyers, defendants, and families. I followed the directions I'd been given to Courtroom C and waited outside until I was called. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with dark wood paneling and rows of benches. Brenda Lawrence sat at the defense table with her attorney, looking much less intimidating in her jail jumpsuit than she had in her fake HOA uniform. She didn't meet my eyes as I was sworn in and took my seat in the witness stand. The prosecutor, a sharp-looking woman named Melissa Reynolds, led me through my testimony calmly and efficiently. I described the morning of the incident in detail: Brenda's appearance at my door, the fake violations, the demands for payment, and her threatening behavior when I refused. "And what made you suspicious, Mr. Vincent?" Miss Reynolds asked. "Several things," I replied. "The logo on her badge didn't match our HOA's logo exactly. The phone number on the citation was different from our HOA's number. And when I questioned her authority, she claimed to be the HOA president, which I knew was false because I'd just spoken with our actual president days earlier." "What did you do when you realized something was wrong?" "I refused to pay, and told her I would contact our HOA board to verify. When she became aggressive and tried to prevent me from closing my door, I threatened to call the police. The defense attorney, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, tried to suggest that I might have misinterpreted a legitimate HOA enforcement action. But his cross-examination fell flat when faced with the overwhelming evidence that Sunset Valley had no enforcement division and never authorized Brenda Lawrence to represent them. After I was dismissed, several other witnesses testified, including Richard Townsend, Barbara Johnson, and Detective Jimenez. The evidence against Brenda and her accomplices was damning, not just from our community, but from many others they had targeted. By the time the preliminary hearing concluded, the judge had found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges. However, a few days later, I received a call from the prosecutor's office informing me that Brenda and 3 of her accomplices had agreed to plea deals in exchange for reduced sentences. They would be pleading guilty to multiple felony counts and would serve between 5 and 8 years in prison, depending on their level of involvement and prior criminal history. The remaining 2 defendants, including one of the men I'd spotted in the blue sedan, decided to take their chances at trial. The prosecutor warned me I might need to testify again, but seemed confident in the strength of their case. In early July, our HOA held another community meeting, this time to celebrate the successful resolution of the case and to formally implement new security protocols. The meeting room was decorated with balloons and a banner that read, "Sunset Valley Strong." There was a festive atmosphere as neighbors mingled, sharing stories and expressing relief that the ordeal was largely behind us. Richard called the meeting to order with a tap of his gavel. Before we get to the official business, I want to take a moment to recognize someone whose quick thinking and courage helped bring these criminals to justice. Isaiah Vincent not only stopped a scammer in her tracks, but helped establish our Neighborhood Watch program and even assisted in the capture of 2 more suspects. Isaiah, would you come up here? Surprised and a bit embarrassed, I made my way to the front of the room as everyone applauded. Richard handed me a plaque that read Sunset Valley Hero with my name and the date engraved below. I don't know what to say, I admitted, facing the crowd. I just did what anyone would do when something didn't seem right. The real heroes are all of you, coming together to protect our community, and the law enforcement officers who worked tirelessly on this case. As I returned to my seat, neighbors patted me on the back and offered words of thanks. It was a surreal moment. I'd never considered myself particularly civic-minded before all this happened, but the experience had changed me. I felt more connected to my community than ever. After the meeting, Detective Jimenez surprised everyone by showing up with news. She waited until the formal proceedings were done before approaching the podium. "I hope you don't mind my crashing your celebration," she said with a smile. "I wanted to personally thank all of you for your cooperation in this case and to share some good news. Based on information provided by the defendants who accepted plea deals, we've identified similar operations in 6 other states. Federal authorities are now involved, and arrests are being made as we speak." A cheer went up from the crowd. Detective Jimenez continued once the noise died down. Additionally, the district attorney's office is working to set up a restitution fund for victims. While we can't guarantee everyone will get all their money back, there's a good chance most victims will receive at least partial reimbursement. This announcement was met with even louder applause. For many of our neighbors, especially those on fixed incomes, recovering even some of the money they'd lost to the scam would be significant. After the meeting, I invited Richard, Detective Jimenez, and several neighbors who'd been central to resolving the situation over to my house for an impromptu cookout. As we gathered on my back deck, grilling burgers and sharing stories, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently things might have turned out if I'd simply paid that fake fine on that April morning. "What I still don't understand," said Mike Donovan between bites of his burger, "is how they thought they'd get away with it long term. Didn't they realize people would eventually compare notes and figure out the scam?" Detective Jimenez nodded. "That's exactly what they counted on not happening. HOAs aren't known for fostering communication between residents. In fact, many homeowners feel isolated in dealing with their HOA. The scammers exploited that isolation." "Well, they picked the wrong neighborhood this time," Barbara Johnson said firmly. "Sunset Valley sticks together." "Indeed we do," Richard agreed, raising his glass in a toast. "To community, cooperation, and justice served." We all raised our glasses, and I felt a warmth that went beyond the summer evening. What had started as a frightening confrontation had transformed into an opportunity for growth and connection. Our community was stronger now, more vigilant and more united. And I had found a sense of purpose I hadn't even realized I was missing. In the months that followed, life in Sunset Valley returned to a new normal. Our neighborhood watch program continued, now expanded to include regular social gatherings that strengthened community bonds. Richard implemented permanent changes to HOA communications, making it easier for residents to verify the authenticity of notices and creating more transparency in the fine assessment process. The final 2 defendants in the HOA scam case went to trial in September. I testified again, this time in front of a jury. The evidence was overwhelming and both men were convicted on all counts. Their sentencing was scheduled for November. In late October, just as the leaves were turning, I received an official letter from the district attorney's office. The restitution program was moving forward, with funds already being distributed to victims. Additionally, the letter informed me that Brenda Lawrence and her accomplices had been linked to similar scams in 12 states, dating back nearly 5 years. The total amount they had fraudulently collected was estimated at over $1.2 million. That evening, I called Detective Jimenez to thank her for keeping me informed throughout the process. "I should be thanking you," she replied. "This case has led to one of the largest fraud busts in county history. We've even been approached about turning it into a training case for other departments. I'm just glad it's over," I said honestly. "Almost over," she corrected. "There's still the sentencing next month, and we're continuing to unravel their network. But the immediate threat to your community is definitely gone." After we hung up, I sat on my back deck with Rex, watching the sunset over the neighborhood. Houses that had once been just structures where strangers lived now represented friends and allies. I knew the names of the children playing in the yards, the stories of the elderly couples taking their evening walks, the dreams of the new families who had recently moved in. The irony wasn't lost on me. A fake HOA enforcement officer had inadvertently strengthened our real HOA community in ways that would have otherwise taken years to develop. The scammers had sought to exploit the disconnect between neighbors, but instead had catalyzed a powerful connection. In November, I attended the sentencing hearing for all 6 defendants. The courtroom was packed with victims from multiple communities, including a strong showing from Sunset Valley. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, listened to impact statements from several victims before delivering her decision. "The court recognizes the significant harm caused by these actions," she stated firmly. "Beyond the financial impact, you violated people's sense of security in their own homes and exploited the trust that communities place in their governing associations. Such violations strike at the heart of neighborhood stability and cannot be tolerated. She sentenced Brenda Lawrence to 8 years in prison, with the others receiving between 5 and 7 years, depending on their roles and prior records. Additionally, all were ordered to pay restitution to their victims and would be prohibited from working in any capacity related to property management or homeowner associations upon release. As we filed out of the courtroom, Richard put his hand on my shoulder. "Justice served," he said with satisfaction. "Indeed," I agreed, "though I still can't believe one woman with a clipboard and an attitude caused all this." "Never underestimate the power of false authority," Richard replied thoughtfully. "People are conditioned to comply with official-seeming demands. That's what made this scam so effective and so insidious." That evening, Sunset Valley held a final community gathering about the case. It wasn't a formal HOA meeting, but rather a celebration of closure. Tables were set up in the community center with potluck dishes, and someone had created a display board titled "Lessons Learned" with photos and news clippings about the case. As I mingled with my neighbors, I was struck by how many new connections had formed. Elena Garcia was teaching Spanish to the Patel children. Mike Donovan had started a weekend handyman service helping elderly residents with home repairs. Barbara Johnson was organizing a community garden on a previously unused plot of HOA land. Richard clinked a glass to get everyone's attention and invited me to join him at the front of the room. "A year ago, if you had told me our quiet community would help bring down a multi-state fraud operation, I would have laughed," he began. "But thanks to Isaiah's vigilance, the cooperation of so many of you, and the excellent work of law enforcement, that's exactly what happened." He turned to me. "Isaiah, would you like to say a few words?" I hadn't prepared anything, but as I looked around at the faces of my neighbors' people who had gone from strangers to friends through this shared experience, the words came naturally. When I moved to Sunset Valley 3 years ago, I was looking for a nice house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and reasonable HOA fees, I said, earning a chuckle from the crowd. What I found, eventually, was something much more valuable: a community of people who look out for each other. It shouldn't have taken a scam to bring us together, but I'm grateful for the connection it created. I raised my glass. To Sunset Valley, not just an HOA, but a home. To Sunset Valley. Everyone echoed, raising their glasses. As the evening wound down and people began to head home, Detective Jimenez made a surprise appearance. She caught me as I was helping stack chairs. "I didn't want to interrupt your celebration," she said, "but I thought you'd like to know we've identified over 400 victims across the country, and the restitution fund has already distributed nearly $400,000. "That's amazing news," I said, genuinely pleased. "There's more," she continued. "The case has led to a statewide initiative to protect communities from similar scams. The Attorney General's office is developing guidelines for HOAs on secure communication protocols and resident education. So some good is coming from all this," I observed. "A lot of good," she corrected. "Including in your community. I've never seen neighbors come together quite like you all have." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with an angry knock on my door 7 months earlier. The fake HOA patrol had tried to take my money, but had inadvertently given me something far more valuable: a true sense of belonging. I pulled into my driveway and noticed my next-door neighbor, Tom, retrieving his mail. We'd barely spoken before the HOA scam incident, but now we had a standing Sunday morning coffee meetup. "Hey, Isaiah," he called, waving. "Sorry I missed the gathering tonight. How did it go?" "It was great," I replied. "I'll tell you all about it on Sunday." "Looking forward to it," he said with a genuine smile. As I unlocked my front door, I glanced back at the quiet street I now knew so well, not just the houses, but the people inside them. The fake HOA patrol had tried to exploit our community's weaknesses, but had instead revealed its strengths. And for that, ironically, I was almost grateful. Almost. I still made sure to check the peephole carefully whenever someone knocked unexpectedly on my door.